Okay, welcome back to the Muay Thai Nutrition Podcast. It's been a little while since you've heard from me. I've been very busy with some exciting projects going on behind the scenes, including seminars, fighting nutrition courses, and things like that will all be revealed in good time. Anyway, today I'm back with a new episode. I'm going to be talking about choosing your weight class. I recently posted a reel on Instagram about the sweet spot when choosing your weight class. You don't want to go too low, you don't want to go too high. And someone quite rightly asked the question as well, okay, how do I find that sweet spot? So I will dive into that in today's episode. Firstly, though, let's talk about the normal approach that fighters do when choosing their weight class. Normally, it's dictated by their coach or their trainer, and what they will do is they will take whatever weight they are now, and they will just minus an arbitrary number of kilograms from that, maybe 3, 5, 6, 8, whatever, just some number of kilograms from whatever they currently weigh. Or the fighter themselves or the coach will base it on similar body size training partners. So if they have a training partner who is a similar height and weight to them, and they fight at X weight class, then the trainer might say, okay, well, you're basically the same, so you should fight at this weight class as well. Basically, just a guess. The drawback of this method or these methods is that they don't account for individual differences, which you will come to learn today are incredibly important and wide-ranging. And also, if you're basing it on a training partner, perhaps they're not fighting at an ideal weight class for them. So it's best to base it on yourself, on your individual needs and requirements and preferences, all of which I will dive into today. So we'll be taking a more calculated approach to choosing your ideal weight class. Now, there are two factors you need to consider when choosing your ideal weight class. Number one is that it is within ideal body composition ranges for you. And two is that you are able to be within a safe percentage away from the weight class by fight week to make the final weight cut. So those are the two factors that need to be considered when choosing your ideal weight class. The reason that we need both is that, for example, if you are at an optimal body composition and optimal level of body fat or leanness, but you're either doing too large or too small a weight cut, then it's not ideal. Or if you have a suboptimal body composition for you, for example, maybe your body fat is too high or if it's too low, but you're doing an optimal weight cut percentage magnitude, then it's still not ideal. We need to tick off both of those boxes. So you need to be at a level of leanness for you that is conducive to optimal performance. And at that level of leanness, you also need to be able to be a safe percentage away from the weight class to make that final weight cut over fight week. As I briefly mentioned at the beginning, the ideal weight class is very much a sweet spot between two extremes. If you're fighting at too low of a weight class, your performance is going to suffer because you are dieting way too hard and too restrictively over fight camp, and or you are cutting far too much weight in the final week. Your performance is really going to suffer from that underfueling or the extreme weight cut. On the opposite end of the spectrum, if you're fighting at too high a weight class, you might be at a size disadvantage compared to your opponents. For example, if you don't really lose any weight over the fight camp and if you don't cut any weight, then potentially someone who walks around much heavier than you could be reducing body fat and cutting a moderate amount of weight, and they will potentially be stronger and more powerful than you for the same weight class. So the sweet spot is found in between these two extremes, where you are cutting an appropriate amount of weight for you and you're at an appropriate level of leanness. Again, ticking off those two criteria that I mentioned, this sweet spot is where you'll put on your best performance. So let's dive into the first criteria. So at an optimal and achievable level of body composition for you. The UFC Performance Institute recommend that at the period of the weigh-in or the fight, that male fighters are between 5 to 12% body fat and female fighters are between 12 to 22% body fat, with the important caveat that in general, lighter athletes are typically able to achieve lower levels of body fat than heavier athletes. These percentage ranges would not be so applicable to heavyweight fighters, for example. Similarly, Sigma Nutrition recommend 7 to 12% body fat for males and 16 to 22% body fat for females, with the important caveat that certain individuals may be better suited to higher or lower numbers than this. Personally, I would be more aligned with Sigma Nutrition's recommendations, with the lower end of the range being at 7% for males and 16% for females, compared to the UFC's 5 and 12% for males and females respectively. Some people may be able to go as low as 5% body fat for males or 12% body fat for females, but in my experience, it would only be the genetically blessed that would be able to achieve this, and I wouldn't target these. So don't set your target at 5% body fat or 12% body fat. There's a high percentage chance that this is going to be too low for you. So I prefer Sigma Nutrition's slightly more conservative recommendations of being 7 to 12% body fat for males, 16 to 22% body fat for females. Again, that is at the weigh-in and the fight. Out of camp or earlier in the fight camp, this level of body fat would likely be a little bit higher. Individual differences will dictate where within that range you sit, and it's important to note that lower is not better. So if we just give the male example of 7 to 12% body fat, for any individual being at 7% body fat is not necessarily going to be better or more conducive for their performance than 12% body fat. So don't fall into the trap of thinking that lower is not better. These are general recommendations that somewhere within that range could reasonably be considered optimal, or at least a good starting point. Ultimately, what I want you to do is to use these as a reference point, but it's really important to know that body fat percentage is very hard to measure, very hard to measure accurately. That is, you can pretty easily stand on one of those bioelectrical impedance analysis scales and get a body fat percentage number. However, the accuracy of this number can vary by a huge amount, so I wouldn't put too much stock, if any, in that at all. Don't put too much stock in a number that is hard to measure accurately, because how you feel and how you perform is infinitely more important than a largely arbitrary range with a large potential for error. Taking a step back, you might be asking, okay, well, I know that fighters, most of them are relatively lean, especially in the lower weight divisions, but why is this? Why do we care about body fat? The reason we care about body fat in weight class-based sports specifically is that muscle has the potential to generate force and fat does not. So in theory, we want a high amount of muscle for your weight class. So that is the important caveat there. For your weight class, we're not bodybuilders. We don't want to just have as much muscle as physically possible. We want a high amount of muscle for your specific weight class. Now, if I give you an example, let's say we've got two fighters, fighter A and fighter B. Let's say fighter A is 20% body fat and fighter B is 10% body fat. So fighter A is less lean, fighter B is more lean and within those recommended ranges that I mentioned earlier. Now, if both of these fighters fight at 65 kilograms, fighter B has less body fat. Therefore, for the 65 kilogram weight class, they have more muscle. Because they have 10% body fat, there's more room within that weight for muscle. If they have more muscle, they have more potential to generate force. So they're likely stronger and more powerful for the weight class than boxer A. And that's obviously a benefit in combat sports, being stronger and more powerful than your opponent in most scenarios, or if not all scenarios, is going to be the ideal situation there. There are some important individual differences to consider. So your genetics, your sex is also going to dictate where within that body fat range you can sit, and even if within that range at all. For example, you'll know that I gave different ranges for males and females because females need to have a higher amount of body fat than males. Also, your genetics will determine how low a body composition you can reasonably maintain. It will also depend on the date of your next fight. If you have a fight in 1 week, you will probably be leaner than if you have a fight in 2 or 3 months. It will depend on your weight class, as I mentioned earlier. Lower or lighter weight classes will likely be able to achieve greater levels of leanness than higher or heavyweight boxers, for example. It's also important to consider your sport and your fighting style. If your sport is grappling based, so MMA, wrestling, judo, for example, where you're using a lot of your strength and your body weight, versus more striking based sports like boxing, Muay Thai, Taekwondo. In the more grappling based sports, being heavier, therefore doing a larger weight cut and potentially being leaner, so having more muscle mass, is going to benefit you because strength plays a greater role in those sports. Imagine if you're sitting on top of your opponent, ground and pounding them, being heavier and stronger than your opponent is going to be more beneficial. Whereas in striking based sports, it plays less of a role, but this is where we need to consider fight style as well. So if you are an inside fighter, or for example, in Muay Thai, a clinch fighter, being stronger than your opponent because you're relying heavily on strength for your fight style is going to be a benefit for you. So you could consider either being leaner, so having more muscle mass for your weight class, and or doing a larger weight cut, so being potentially stronger than your opponent. Another important thing to consider, especially in striking-based sports or sports that have a striking-based component, is limb length. So if you normally walk around at 70 kilograms and you cut weight to fight at 65 kilograms, for example, you are probably going to have longer limbs, a longer reach than someone who walks around at 65 kilograms and fights at 65 kilograms. So these are all just important things to consider when choosing your ideal weight class. One thing that I know I've already mentioned, but I want to mention it again, is that lower is not better. Going too low in terms of body fat percentage could lead to things like illness, injury, mood disturbances, low energy, and health issues as well. A variety of health issues, but one example is amenorrhea for females, which is basically the cessation or the stopping of your period, which can be a symptom of energy deficiency or having too low a body fat percentage. So on the body composition half of the criteria, the take-home points are that I don't want you to worry too much about the numbers. What you should do is aim for an achievable level of leanness for you, where you feel good and where you perform good, where you're not out of shape, but equally you're not hyper focused on dieting and just all consumed with thoughts about food 24/7. If your Instagram explore page is just full of food porn, then this might be a sign that you are dieting too hard or that you're being too restrictive with your dieting. So I've covered the body composition part of the criteria when choosing your ideal weight class. Let's now look at the ability to be a safe percentage away from your weight class by fight week for the final weight cut. So for a same day weigh-in, my recommendations are different than a day before weigh-in due to the different recovery window. If you have a longer recovery window, then you can cut more weight because you have more time to recover, to refuel your carbohydrate stores, to replenish or rehydrate your fluids. So for a same day weigh-in with up to 6 hours to recover, I recommend doing somewhere between a 0% to a 4% body weight cut. So obviously a 0% cut would be not cutting any weight. A 4% cut would be cutting 4% of your body weight. And I group them into classifications. So for a same day weigh-in, up to 6 hour recovery window, I would class a small cut at 0%, a medium cut at 2% of your body weight, and a large cut at 4% of your body weight. Now for a day before weigh-in, where you've got at least 12, probably up to 24, maybe even up to 36 hours to recover, this longer recovery window means you can cut more weight. So for a day before weigh-in, a small weight cut I would classify as 4% of your body weight, a medium weight cut I would classify as 6% of your body weight, and a large cut I would classify as 8% of your body weight. So in summary, same day weigh-in, 0 to 4% weight cut, day before weigh-in, 4 to 8% weight cut. I recommend that you start with a smaller weight cut, especially if you are inexperienced or you are young or you are female. It's better to be a little bit more conservative. So start with a small weight cut. And then if you feel good doing that, you could maybe increase it for the next fight. One important caveat when I give these percentages is that these numbers are based on being an athlete who is well hydrated and you're well nourished, i.e. you've been consuming adequate calories, macronutrients, and fiber throughout the lead up. If you are already like fasting, doing low carb, keto, carnivore, any of that stuff, you're already depleted. You can't drain an empty tank, so these numbers would not apply. The amount you would be able to cut will be significantly less because your tank is already empty, you're already depleted. So what I want to do now is to give you some questions to ask yourself when selecting your ideal weight class. So on the point we just spoke about, can I be within a safe percentage away by fight week? So that is 0 to 4% above the weight class for a same day weigh-in, 4 to 8% above the weight class for a day before weigh-in. If you're not sure how to calculate this, basically take your weight class, divide it by 100, and then times it by 101, for example, for 1% above, 102 for 2% above, etc., all the way up to 108 for 8% above the weight class. If you can make that weight, if you can be that walk around weight by the beginning of fight week, then you've ticked off that criteria. Moving on from that, at the weight that you would need to be by fight week, so to be 0 to 4% above for a same day weigh-in or 4 to 8% above for a day before weigh-in, to be that weight, how much weight would you need to lose over the preparation period in order to achieve that target in total, and how much would that equate to per week? Personally, I don't like my clients losing any more than 1% of their body weight per week, i.e. 0.6 kilograms for a 60 kilogram fighter. To be honest, closer to 0.5% body weight loss per week is what I normally recommend for my fighters and what we would ideally target. So using that 60 kilogram fighter example, that would be equal to 0.3 kilograms per week. This means that some of my clients who fight at 60 kilograms are able to eat like 2,600, 2,800, even up to 3,000 calories per day during camp whilst preparing for a fight at 60 kilograms. The slower the weight loss that is needed, the more you can eat during camp, the better you can fuel training, the better you'll perform. We want to feel unstoppable during our training, during our fight camp. We don't want to feel depleted and fatigued and weak, because this certainly isn't going to help not only your physical performance, but also your mental performance and your confidence in the lead up to the fight. So ask yourself, have I been this weight before? How did I feel when I was this weight? If you haven't been that weight before, then what makes you think that you can reduce your body fat to this level? And if you felt bad at that weight before, what makes you think, okay, when I do it this time, I'm going to feel better? At that weight that you would need to be by fight week, do you think that would be a suitable body composition for you? I.e., is it one where you could put on your best performance? Because that's what we care about. Don't get caught up in the numbers. I know this episode is all about body composition and weight classes. Ultimately, our ultimate goal is for you to put on your best performance and to fight your best fight and ideally win. So don't get too caught up in all of the variables. If it's a weight class where you can fight your best fight and put in your best performance, that is an ideal weight class for you. So hopefully that gives you a good framework to select your ideal weight class. You might not get it perfect from the get-go, and it's an iterative process. So use this to give you a best educated, informed guess for your weight class. And then over your fight career, you can decide, okay, maybe moving up or moving down would be a good idea based on your performances and based on your experiences. But this will give you a better starting point than 99.9% of fighters. And you'll also be taking into account way more variables than any fighters would normally do if you select your weight class using the advice I've given you today. If you have any questions, feedback, or requests, you can message me on Instagram at James Nicol Nutrition. That's all for today. I'll catch you in the next one.